Welcome to a brand new episode of the Melmat Podcast, and after a month of or so of inactivity, I'm here, and this is going to be a special Halloween episode. Even though I'm recording this the day before Halloween, this is going to be posted up. I'm going to try and get this up on Halloween. So, with that said, happy Halloween to everybody out there. And so today we're going to be doing a special Halloween episode. And what better Halloween episode to do than on a band that, quite honestly, is a pretty perfect band to listen to on Halloween. And I've said this many times before. They're one of my favorite bands of all time. We are going to be taking a look at the discography of Type O Negative. And this is something that I wanted to do for a really long time on the show, but I never got around to it. I wanted to do it last year, but due to timing, the timing just wasn't right. So I just decided to do a top 10 list of my favorite Type O songs. But now this year it's Halloween. I'm not really doing much on the show, to be honest. I'm just not. But I decided, you know what? Now is a better time than ever. Why not go ahead and do it now? So that's going to be the new episode today, a Type O Negative retrospective, and that's going to be pretty exciting, to tell you the truth. So we'll get started with that in just a couple of moments. But before we get started with that, let's go ahead and do the usual shout-outs. First of all, Chucky's Playground, great place to be. If you haven't checked it out, definitely check it out. We just had a great live stream, a great Halloween party from Spanky and G, in which we watched The Exorcist, among other things. And it was just a great time. You know, it's just really cool. And we also have a lot of cool things going on the site, like G's doing a special Halloween series on the site. Just all kinds of cool stuff happening. So definitely join if you haven't joined already. It's an awesome place to be. So definitely do it. And Movie Mayhem with Spanky and G, check it out. It's just a really cool show. They look at all kinds of movies. So definitely check it out. It's very entertaining and it's very fun. So now let's talk about Type O Negative. And the way I heard of Type O Negative, like the first time I ever heard of Type O Negative was about a few years ago when I first watched Bride of Chucky. And this had to be like around 2012, I want to say, like around that time, because that's when I first saw Bride of Chucky on one of the Encore channels, one of the movie channels, and I instantly fell in love with that movie. And so I was just looking for anything Bride related. And they had a soundtrack, the Bride soundtrack, and on it was a song by Type O Negative called Love You to Death, which is on their October Rust album. And we'll talk about that for sure later on in the show. But you know, I started listening to the soundtrack, and it's a really great soundtrack. You know, listen to it if you haven't. Great choices on that soundtrack. But Love You to Death is one of those songs that really stuck with me. I really like this band. And I had sort of like heard of Type O Negative, you know, on and off prior to that. Unfortunately, Peter Steele's death. And, you know, I heard about that. You know, that was sort of like the first time I ever actually heard of Type O Negative, and I heard them be mentioned on that metal show. I think prior to that or around that time. So, but "Love You to Death" was really the first Type O Negative song I had ever heard, and I really liked the sound of it. I really liked, you know, sort of the doomy gothic kind of sound to it. I really liked how heavy it was, about how heavy and soft it could be, and I just really liked it. After that, I just started, looking for more Type O Negative stuff. Just started listening to the albums, ever since, and I really love that band. They've been one of my favorites ever since. So we'll go ahead and start from the beginning, and we're going to go ahead and look at their very first album, and this is Slow, Deep, and Hard. And this is from 1991. This is their first album. And what's interesting about this album is that it sounds a little bit different from what they would end up doing. And a lot of their stuff, a lot of band stuff do end up being different on the first album, but this one is pretty different as well. It almost has a bit of a different sound to it as well. While it does have some of its Type O Negative's usual stuff, like it does have the doom metal stuff and the gloomy and stuff like that, they also have a bit of a thrash sound to it, And Peter Steele's band prior to this, Carnivore, was a bit of a crossover thrash band, so it does sort of make sense that there would be sort of this thrash sound into it, and it's pretty cool to see Type O Negative do a thrash metal kind of album. And the production on this is a bit raw as well. It's not quite as refined, as the later albums would be, but when you're dealing with sort of a debut album, it's sort of understandable. And it's also sort of progressive in a way, because there's several different parts to songs. Like, Zero Tolerance has 3 parts to it. The first part is Type A, Personality Disorder. Part 2, Kill You Tonight. And Part 3, Love You to Death. And by the way, this part has nothing to do with the actual song Love You to Death. I think they're completely different, but that's sort of what they do with this. And another thing that's really interesting is that a lot of the songs are very long. Like, the longest song on the album is the very first one, Unsuccessfully Coping with the Natural Beauty of Infidelity. And that clocks in at 12 minutes and 39 seconds. Really the only short song on the album is The Misinterpretation of Silence and Its Disastrous Consequences, and that's 1 minute and 4 seconds. The rest clock in well over 6 minutes. So it's pretty interesting to see, them do long songs like this. And there's really only 7 tracks on the album. And I mean, personally, I love long songs. I think they're cool. I love it when Dream Theater, does it. I like it when Type O Negative does it. And what I really like about both of those bands, specifically Type O Negative, but Dream Theater as well, long songs, it's sort of a debate, kind of, in a way. Sometimes long songs can get a little bit boring, but with Type O Negative and Dream Theater, they never really become boring. They always find a way to sort of stay interesting and to kind of hold your interest for all of that time. And I think that's pretty cool. I'd probably say Zero Tolerance is one of my favorites off this album. I'd probably say my favorite off this album is Prelude to Agony. That's a really good one. So, and my least favorite would probably be Glass Walls of Limbo, which is a dance mix of something. It's just, I don't know, it's just kind of forgettable, in my opinion. But, overall, this one, if you're really wondering what Type O Negative sounded like in the beginning, how they first started out, I'd say check this out. And maybe check out some of the first 2 Carnivore albums while you're at it, because they both sort of have like a very similar sound to it in terms of the rawness and the thrash metal sound and all that. So if you're really curious as to how Type O Negative first started out, I'd say pick up this album. I think you probably enjoy it. And so now we move on to their second album, The Origin of the Feces. Yes, that is what it's called. once again, Type O Negative showing that sense of humor. And yeah, let's talk about that for a second. What I really like about Type O Negative, I think what's very endearing about the band is that they never really take themselves that seriously. It's obvious that they have a sense of humor about themselves, and a lot of bands nowadays, gothic metal bands, standard whatever. I think a lot of them do take themselves a bit too seriously. But Type O Negative is like, you know what, we can make fun of ourselves, just like that's what I really like about Type O Negative, the fact that they're not afraid to sort of make fun of themselves, make fun of stuff, just have a laugh at something. I think that's what's really endearing about them. But anyway, The Origin of the Feces, their second album, released in 1992. And this one is sort of weird because it's made to sound like a live album, even though it's not actually a live album. It's a fake live album, if you will. Like, it's a studio album, but they just put live effects into it to make it sound live. And also, a lot of the songs on here, the majority of the songs on here were already on the first album, but they were just sort of re-recorded. And, that's one reason that I'm not too big a fan of this album, is because I've already heard these songs on the first album. I don't really care to hear them again. I'd much rather hear all new material. And I don't think the live stuff really... I don't know. I'm not a big fan of it. Like, one interesting thing is that they actually do stop a song because of a bomb threat that the club that they're performing at issues like a bomb threat. And I think that's on the song Gravity, which is the third track on here. And I think that is an interesting thing that they did. But other than that, they don't really do much. Like, they just kind of sort of interact with the audience. And it's something like at the very beginning of the album, they're going on stage and the crowd is just chanting, "You suck! You suck! You suck!" And I had to laugh at that. I thought that was really funny. But while the majority of the songs on here were just songs off the first album, there are also some new songs on here, like "Are You Afraid?", which is pretty cool. And there's also a really cool cover of "Hey Joe" by Jimi Hendrix called "Hey Pete." And there's also a cool little bonus track on a repressing of the album, which is a cover of Black Sabbath's "Paranoid." And I'm like, okay, like that is like a perfect band for Type O Negative to cover. I think they did the song Black Sabbath on a Black Sabbath tribute album. I think they did that. And that's a really cool cover in itself. But the Paranoid cover is really good as well. So overall, this one, I'll just go ahead and say it's probably my least favorite Type O Negative album. I didn't care for the repeats. I wasn't a huge fan of the fake live album, even though they did do some interesting things with it. I never really cared for it that much. So this is probably my least favorite album. Not to say that it's terrible, because it's really not. But I didn't care for the repeat songs that much. Like, I would probably just go ahead and recommend the new songs, like "Are You Afraid?", "Hey Pete", and "Paranoid". Like, those are really the only songs I would recommend. Other than that, I'd skip this album because you're really not missing much. So then we move on to the album that probably made Type O Negative. This is probably the breakthrough album. And this is Bloody Kisses. And this one is great. This one was released in 1993. And this one is definitely a great album. This is a great album. And, there's a lot of great songs on here, like "Christian Woman", "Black Number One", "Little Miss Scarall", which is probably the best known song, probably the most famous song that they did. It's definitely one of my favorite Type O Negative songs. And throughout the album, there's these kind of little, I'm not really sure how, I'm not really sure what exactly to call them. Like, sound bites, or I don't know what to call them, but just these sort of brief little tracks, like Fay Ray come out and play, which is just like the band doing like these Gregorian chants or whatever. And Dark Side of the Womb, which is like a baby making noises and stuff. Just sort of interesting stuff like that. And they do a really good cover of Summer Breeze, which is really cool. And Bloody Kisses, the title track, is really good as well. Can't Lose You is a great closing track. So overall, I think it's a really good album. It's definitely probably, I think it would technically be their best one, but the one after this is probably the best one out of all of them. At least in my opinion, anyway. But Bloody Kisses, not much to say here. Just a really great album. If you had to pick, a place to start with Type O Negative, if you were like a new Type O Negative fan and is a little bit unsure about where to start, I would start with this album and work your way upwards, because this is probably the definitive Type O Negative album, at least technically. And then the next album, and I've said this before, but this is one of my favorite albums of all time. I think I even made a list a few months ago in which I named this one of my favorite albums of all time. This is October Rust, and this was released in 1996. And I really love this album. This album is by far my favorite Type O Negative album. Just the atmosphere of it is just absolutely fantastic. And October Rush, the title, it's exactly what it is. The album, it really does feel like, you can listen to this. This is like the definitive autumn/fall, whatever you want to call it, kind of album. Like, you can listen to this album really in September, October, November, and it really fits. Like, this album just sounds like the fall season. You know what I mean? It's just a really great album to listen to around this time. Around the Halloween season, around the autumn time. It's just a really cool album to listen to. Just the atmosphere, it just really fits the crisp, autumn air, the autumn weather. And this album also really starts out pretty funny too. It starts out with a track called Bad Ground, which is like a joke intro. And it's supposed to sound like your headphones aren't working properly, like you plugged them in wrong or whatever. And that's really funny. Once again, Type O Negative sense of humor. They don't ever take themselves too seriously, which I really like. And then we have Love You to Death, which, like I said just several minutes ago, was the first Type O Negative song I had ever heard. And it's just really great. Bride of Chucky. I always think of Bride of Chucky whenever I listen to it. I think it really fits the theme of the movie. Then Be My Druidess is really good as well. Red Water, Christmas Morning is a really cool one. Even though this album is very great to listen to in autumn, that particular song is pretty cool to listen to around Christmas time. Because it's sort of like the antithesis of Christmas. It's very gloomy and very depressing. But, yeah, so it's sort of an opposite of everything Christmas, but, yeah. And My Girlfriend's Girlfriend, which is one of my all-time favorite Type O Negative songs. It's a little bit different from the usual doom metal and stuff like that. It's a bit more psychedelic. It's pretty lighthearted compared to everything else, but that's why it's one of my favorites, because I might have said this before in the past, but I really like bands who are not afraid to experiment in the studio. I really like bands who aren't afraid to step out of their comfort zone. Stuff like Marilyn Manson, I really like, because he does like to experiment from time to time with new sounds and stuff like that. Metallica, even though a lot of people don't like that, I at least appreciate it. Stuff like that. I really like. Alice Cooper, I think, is another one. Like new wave. He's done stuff like that. Hair metal. He's pretty much done everything. Industrial metal. So I really like bands that like to experiment with other sounds. My girlfriend's girlfriend is probably the best one on the track. At least my favorite one on here. And Burnt Flowers Fallen is a really great one as well. I really like that one. And Praise of Bacchus is really cool as well. Cinnamon Girl is another great cover. And that's the thing about Typo Negative. Pretty much every cover they did was pretty fantastic. I think what really makes them great is that they really made their cover songs sound like them. They're not just doing it, over again, which a lot of cover songs, nowadays tend to do. But they really do make it sound their own. They make it their own. They make it very doomy and gloomy, and I really like that. And Wolf Moon, which is a werewolf song, obviously very perfect to listen to around the Halloween season. And then Haunted is a great outro to this. It's a great way to end the album. And so overall, October Rust, all-time favorite Typo Negative album. I would absolutely recommend this album. With Typo Negative, the first album you sort of have to listen to is Bloody Kisses, because that's like their breakthrough album. That's the album where they really found themselves. But I'd say if you want to listen to Typo Negative at their most creative, at their peak, I would say definitely listen to this, because it's just a fantastic album, in my opinion. My favorite Typo Negative album. I highly recommend it. And so now we move on to World Coming Down. And this was released in 1999. And I just want to say, with this album, this one is very depressing. And, I know, it's sort of redundant to say that about Typo Negative. But, even by Typo Negative standards, this is a really depressing album. But with that said, I think it's a really good album at that. This was recorded at a time where Peter Steele wasn't really doing the best in his life. He said that they were too strongly connected to an uncomfortable period in his life. But with that said, I do think this is really good. The album starts with another joke intro called Skip It. And this is, I don't know if this is going to be a bit dated or not, because CDs are sort of they're sort of going out of date almost, because, digital downloading and digital stuff, that's where it's at nowadays. And this really kind of only works with a CD copy of the album, kind of, but I don't know how to describe it, but Skip It basically, it's supposed to sound like your CD isn't working, and that's a cool little joke. And then we have White Slavery, which is about cocaine, and the very next track, Sinus, is just like a sound effect of cocaine use, and there's 3 different stuff like that on the album. Sinus relates with cocaine use, Liver goes with drinking, and the lung goes with smoking. And it's sort of supposed to represent how people die. And that's pretty much a running theme on the album. With songs like Everyone I Love Is Dead, World Coming Down, Everything Dies. Again, really depressing. Like, even by Type O Negative standards, this is pretty depressing. But Everyone I Love Is Dead is pretty cool as well. And the opening guitar of the song, at least to me, it sort of sounds like something that Rush would do, almost. I don't know. It just sort of sounds very Rush-ish, you know. And Who Will Save the Sane is really good as well. World Coming Down is great. Probably one of my favorites on the album. Everything Dies is pretty good as well. Pretty solid. And All Hallows Eve is really good. Hallows Eve, great song to listen to around Halloween time. And then to end the album, we get yet another cover song. But this time, it's not just one cover song, it's a medley of cover songs. And not just that, but it's by the same band. And it's the one, the only, the Beatles. And Type O Negative they're sort of like compared to the Beatles a little bit. And they're even nicknamed the Drab Four. And I really like that. They do sort of have a Beatles-X sound to them, And they picked some pretty cool songs to do. They picked Day Tripper, If I Needed Someone, then a revisitation of Day Tripper, and then I Want You, She's So Heavy. So they picked 3 pretty cool songs to do. It's a really cool little medley. It's a really cool way to end the album. So overall, World Coming Down, probably the most depressing Type O Negative album, probably the darkest Type O Negative album. But with that said, overall, regardless, I think it's a really good album. And so, coming up next is Life Is Killing Me from 2003. And I might have said this before, but 2003, one of my favorite years personally, for me, at least in terms of entertainment value. I really have just fond memories of watching WWE and stuff like that, That was a good year for my childhood. But a lot of people put out some pretty great albums, like Alice Cooper, Weird Al. Trying to think who else put out a pretty good album. Metallica, I know some people don't like Saint Anger. A lot of people don't like Saint Anger, but I like it. But Marilyn Manson put out a pretty solid album, so just a lot of people put out some great albums of that particular year. And Type O Negative is one of them. Type O Negative's Life Is Killing Me. This is an album that I kind of think is a little bit underrated. You don't hear a lot of people talk about it, but I think it's really good. I Don't Want to Be Me is a really good track. Less Than Zero is good as well. I Like Goyles is pretty good as well. And How Could She is a pretty interesting track. I really like the riff to this song. I really like it. It's really cool. And the lyrics here are pretty interesting as well. It's pretty much consists of nothing but Peter Steele just saying TV shows women's names like Wilma Flintstone, Marsha Brady, stuff like that, I think. So it's a pretty interesting song on that. And Life Is Killing Me is also pretty cool as well. And We Were Electrocute is definitely my favorite off of this album. The way I first heard that song is in Freddy vs. Jason. And it's sort of playing in the background when I'm trying to think what that character's name was. I think his name was Mark. I want to say it was. Like, he's listening to the song in his bedroom before he gets killed by Freddy Krueger. That's a really good song as well. I really like that one. It's my favorite off there. And there's If You Don't Kill Me, I'm Going to Have to Kill You. And it's done in initials or an acronym, I think is what it's called. And Give Me That. And that's a really good song as well. And Anesthesia, that's a great song as well, underrated as well. Drunk in Paris, which is a really brief, it's about a minute long, a minute and a half long. And it's really just an instrumental, if anything else, but it just sounds really good. and The Dream Is Dead is great as well. So this one I think is really underrated. I'd say check this out. This is an album that doesn't really get a lot. It doesn't really get talked about a lot, but I think it should because I think it just sounds really good. It's a Typo Negative album. Stuff like We Were Electrocuted, something like that. I could really see on October Rust. I think that was really cool. And so we now move on to Typo Negative's final album, Dead Again, from 2007. And Dead Again, Typo Negative only did 7 studio albums. It did sort of feel a bit more than that, but I guess it really was only 7. But Dead Again, I think this is a pretty solid album. I do think it's a solid album. They have some pretty good songs on here, like September Sun is a really good track as well. I really like that. I don't know if that's my favorite from this album or if there's another one. Because there's another one on this album that I want to get to that might be my favorite, but I really don't know because there's a lot of good stuff on there. And Halloween in Heaven is a really good one as well. Again, another great Typo Negative song to listen to around the Halloween season. As if you couldn't already tell, they have a lot of great Halloween songs. That's why I picked them to do them for a special Halloween episode. But yeah, and that one's really good as well. Some Stupid Tomorrow is great as well, and Ode to Locksmiths, The Prophet of Doom, just a lot of great, solid songs. And the final song on here, and judging by that, the final Typo Negative song, is Hail and Farewell to Britain. And I'm really torn on whether this or The Prophet of Doom. Not Prophet of Doom, September Sun. I'm really torn over whether September Sun or Hail and Farewell to Britain is my favorite off this album. I really don't know. Like, both of them are really great songs. So I'm really just unsure. But both of them are great. And this album in general just really... it's just a really solid album, in general. So I'd probably say check this album out. I don't know if I'd say it's as good as the other ones, but I'd say it's probably on par with them, So overall, Typo Negative, one of my favorite bands of all time. The band unfortunately disbanded when Peter Steele passed away in 2010. So that again was the final Typo Negative album. And I really wish Peter Steele was still around today. I'm really curious what kind of music Typo Negative would be making nowadays. But overall, Typo Negative, really great band, really great doom metal band, real great gothic metal band, whatever you want to call it. Great band, great albums. Well, they did have a bit of a few clunkers here and there. For the most part, they were very consistent with their albums. Great albums, one after another. If you're a fan of stuff like, Black Sabbath and stuff like that, I would definitely recommend this band. And I think even if you don't, even if you haven't listened to Black Sabbath before, even if you don't like them, I'd say still check them out because they're just a great band. They got some great songwriting here and there, great music. I mean, just a really great band. So I would definitely recommend it. So that's all for the Melmat podcast this week. Maybe I'll do some more episodes. Maybe I'll do some more episodes more often, but I don't know. I don't really like setting deadlines or something like that. So I kind of like to crank out new episodes whenever I feel like it. But so yeah, maybe I'll do some more episodes more often. But we'll see. But for now, that's all for this week, and I will see you all next time.